Why do we fear the intelligent, not the violent, not the powerful, but the deeply observant, the painfully honest, the ones who see through things too clearly? There's a kind of silence they carry, not an awkward one, not a passive one, but a silence that watches you, a silence that seems to be thinking, constantly, relentlessly. You've seen it before, in the man who doesn't interrupt, but whose quiet presence interrupts everything, in the one who speaks rarely, but when he does, says something you can't forget. It's not about IQ, not about academic degrees. It's something else, something deeper, a kind of mind that can't pretend, that can't play along, that doesn't accept things just because they're popular or polite, and that kind of mind makes people uneasy. He walks into a room and people shift, not because he's loud or threatening, but because he doesn't seem to need the approval they're all chasing. He listens too closely. He sees through small talk. He holds eye contact just a little too long. It's not arrogance. It's not aggression. It's awareness. And awareness, in a world built on distraction, feels dangerous. There's something unnerving about someone who can't be easily labeled, who doesn't follow the social script, who asks why too often, who seems immune to flattery, to fear, to trend. It's not that he tries to be intimidating, it's that he simply is. Because when he looks at you, you don't feel judged, but you do feel seen. And maybe that's the real discomfort. Maybe the intelligent man isn't intimidating because he's better. Maybe he's intimidating because he reminds us of everything we ignore in ourselves. He reflects our questions back to us, our contradictions, our cowardice, our shallow comfort. He doesn't expose us on purpose, he doesn't have to. His existence is enough, and so we laugh him off, or call him cold, or strange, or distant. But deep down, we know. There's a whisper of fear behind our eyes, because we feel it. He knows something, and we're not ready to know it too. Søren Kierkegaard lived like a ghost in his own time. He walked alone through the streets of Copenhagen, a man out of step with the world around him, too devout for the skeptics, too skeptical for the devout. He was misunderstood not because he was incoherent, but because he was too coherent. He saw too much. He believed that the greatest truths couldn't be taught. They had to be lived, experienced, suffered through. He called it subjective truth, the kind that can't be passed on in books or sermons, because it must be earned through despair. Kierkegaard saw the modern world rushing toward comfort, toward systemization, toward labeling everything, measuring everything, explaining everything. But in the process, something vital was being lost: the self. He warned that people were forgetting how to be individuals, that we were becoming crowds, that in our hunger for certainty, we were abandoning authenticity, and the result? A sickness, not of the body, but of the soul. He called it despair. Despair, to Kierkegaard, isn't just sadness. It's the silent scream of a self that knows it's wearing a mask. The ache of someone who senses they are not truly living, who is playing a role, saying the right things, doing what's expected, but feels hollow underneath. Most people run from this despair. They distract themselves with work, with pleasure, with status. But Kierkegaard believed there is another way: to face it, to walk straight into the pain of not knowing who you are, to question everything, to pull away the scaffolding and look into the abyss, not to fall, but to climb. He spoke of the knight of faith, a strange figure, someone who lives with a kind of quiet courage, who gives up everything, the need for answers, the comfort of the crowd, and walks forward anyway. This person doesn't explain themselves. They don't try to convince others. They live in a way that seems absurd from the outside. But to them, it is the only honest way. And it is this honesty, this radical, unnerving honesty, that makes them intimidating, because most of us are still running. We chase applause, chase logic, chase security. But the knight of faith walks in a different direction. He walks inward. He sees that truth is not something out there to be downloaded. It is something in here, to be awakened. And that process isn't glamorous, It's slow, humiliating, lonely. So what happens when a man has truly suffered through this process? He becomes difficult to manipulate. Not because he fights you, but because he cannot be baited. He's not addicted to comfort or consensus. He does not rely on the world to tell him who he is. He has already faced the worst question. What if I am no one? And instead of running, he sat with it. He let it change him. Let it destroy the illusions. The result is a kind of quiet power, not the kind that demands attention, the kind that unsettles people simply by existing, the kind that says without words, I have seen things in myself that you are still hiding from. And that's why intelligent men, especially the deeply self-aware ones, are feared. Not because they judge others, but because they remind us by their very presence that we could be more than what we've settled for. They are Kierkegaard's existential mirrors, and looking into them hurts. There's a strange reaction that intelligent people often provoke. Not admiration, but discomfort. It's subtle. It doesn't show up as direct confrontation. It shows up in awkward silences, in forced laughter, in eye contact that doesn't last, in that barely perceptible tension that says, I don't know why, but I feel uneasy around you. Why? The answer lies in how human psychology handles difference. Most of the time, we're not actually relating to other people. We're relating to the version of ourselves that we see reflected in them. If someone smiles at us, we feel likable. If they ignore us, we feel unworthy. We are, at our core, deeply social mirrors, but some people don't reflect us back. They hold up something else entirely: truth, depth, awareness. And when that reflection shows us parts of ourselves we don't want to see, our insecurities, our contradictions, our unresolved fears, we recoil. This is the psychological root of intimidation. Not power, not threat, but contrast. Imagine two people in a room. One has spent years examining his inner world, his beliefs, his traumas, his motivations. The other hasn't. Now, when they speak, something strange happens. The first man's words don't just carry information, they carry weight. He doesn't just express ideas, he exposes assumptions. His thoughts are sharp, structured, even uncomfortable. The second man may not understand why, but he feels it. A subtle, disorienting sense that he's being outpaced, not intellectually but existentially. This is not about superiority. The intelligent man might not even be trying to prove anything, but his very way of being triggers the other's sense of inadequacy. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that comes from holding two conflicting beliefs at once. We like to believe we're rational, open-minded, independent thinkers. But when someone shows us without attacking us that our beliefs are unexamined, our egos react. We might label him arrogant, or too serious, or antisocial. Not because he is, but because that's easier than admitting we feel insecure in his presence. And here's the paradox. The more grounded he is, the more shaken we feel. There's also a threat to group identity. We unconsciously conform to group norms to feel safe. But the intelligent man often doesn't. He challenges the consensus. He asks inconvenient questions. He doesn't laugh when everyone else does, because maybe the joke wasn't actually funny. This breaks the social rhythm. And when rhythm breaks, people look for a reason. Instead of seeing insight, they see disruption. Instead of depth, they see danger. There's also something else, something harder to admit. We fear freedom. Real intelligence brings it. The freedom to see beyond roles, to question systems, to change. But as Kierkegaard warned, freedom isn't pleasant. It's dizzying. He called it dread. Not fear of what's there, but fear of what could be. The intelligent man often carries this dread quietly. He's already felt it, faced it, integrated it. So he walks through the world with a strange calm, a kind of inner autonomy that others mistake for detachment. But the people around him, they're still trying to suppress it. So his presence becomes a threat, not because he causes dread, but because he awakens it. It's like being in a dark room with someone who turns on the light. You don't blame the light. You blame the person who flipped the switch. And so, we label him, we say he's too intense, too much. We tell him to lighten up. But the truth is, we don't want to sit in the same silence he's made peace with. This isn't about romanticizing the intelligent man or demonizing others. It's about recognizing that some discomfort is a defense mechanism. When intelligence becomes a mirror, people will flinch, not because the mirror is cruel, but because it's clear. And clarity, in a world built on denial, feels violent. But here's the strange part. That same clarity, if we sit with it, can be transformative. Because what first feels like intimidation can become inspiration. If we're willing to look at what the mirror shows us, not with shame but with courage, we might just begin our own journey inward. We might finally ask the questions we've been avoiding. The questions he asked long ago, and in doing so we begin to close the gap, not by becoming him but by becoming more ourselves. And maybe that's the point. Throughout history, there's been a quiet war waged against the mind that dares to ask too much. It doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like exile, like laughter, like silence. But the message is always the same. You are not welcome here. Socrates was one of the first to face this. He didn't write books. He wandered the streets of Athens, asking uncomfortable questions, not to humiliate, but to awaken. He believed that truth lived in dialogue, not in dogma. But the more he asked, the more people squirmed. Eventually, they killed him. Not because he was dangerous with a sword, but because he was dangerous with a question. Galileo faced the sky and saw something the church didn't want to see, that Earth was not the center of the universe. The data was clear. The telescope didn't lie. But the system was not built to accept truth. It was built to protect itself. So they silenced him. And then there was Nietzsche. He looked at the soul of Western civilization and found a corpse. God is dead, he said, not to mock, but to mourn. He saw a society drifting into nihilism, clinging to traditions it no longer believed in. People called him mad. But he wasn't. He was just alone at the edge of an insight no one else wanted. What do these men have in common? They weren't rebels for the sake of rebellion. They weren't provocateurs. They were listeners, listening to reality so deeply that it broke them away from consensus. And consensus doesn't like being questioned. History shows us this. The more clearly someone sees, the more isolated they become. Not because they choose exile, but because the world subtly, steadily pushes them out, not with fire, but with labels. Heretic, madman, elitist, troublemaker. And once labeled, they become easier to ignore, easier to dismiss, easier to forget. But they're not forgotten. Their words survive. Their questions linger. And over time, we realize they weren't dangerous. They were just early. And the fear they provoked wasn't about them. It was about us. Because deep down we knew they were right. Intelligence itself isn't gendered, but how society responds to it often is. When a woman is highly intelligent, she is often labeled as intimidating too, but with different undertones. She's called cold, unapproachable, or too much. But she also receives an odd mixture of fear and fascination. When a man is intelligent, truly intelligent, in a way that disconnects him from the crowd, he becomes something else entirely, threatening. Not because of what he does, but because of what he represents. There's a long-standing archetype buried deep in culture, the man as protector, as provider, as leader. But beneath all these roles, there's an expectation that a man should be understandable, approachable, and above all, useful to others. An intelligent man breaks that mold. He's not easily used. He doesn't strive for dominance yet can't be dominated. He doesn't crave validation yet is often validated by default. His presence challenges the hierarchy, not by climbing it, but by stepping outside of it altogether. And that's unnerving, especially to other men. In competitive male environments, corporate, political, even social, the goal is often power, not wisdom. Charisma is celebrated. Intelligence is fine as long as it plays by the rules. But when a man prioritizes insight over influence, reflection over reward, he's often seen as a threat to the tribe. He's not part of the game. He sees through the game. And for many, that's unforgivable. There's also a darker fear, unspoken but real. The fear of being seen by another man who isn't posturing. We've built a culture where masculinity is often performative, loud, aggressive, status-driven. But the intelligent man doesn't perform. He observes. And that makes people uncomfortable, especially those who've spent their whole lives acting tough, climbing ladders, hiding their confusion behind confidence. To be near a man who doesn't need the mask is to be reminded that you're still wearing one. And then there's how women often react. Some are drawn to him, not because of status or wealth, but because he offers something rare. Depth, presence, real attention. Others are repelled, not because he's unkind, but because he's unreadable. You can't flirt your way into control with a man who isn't controlled by desire. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't seek your approval, so instead of calling him powerful, people call him cold. But the truth is, he feels deeply. He just doesn't outsource his identity to others. And that, in a world of social currency and relational performance, is radical. So why are intelligent men especially feared? Because they reject the roles. They're not trying to dominate, impress, or belong. They're trying to understand. And understanding, when it's real, doesn't play well with systems built on pretending. There's a quiet price to seeing the world clearly. The intelligent man, the truly introspective, uncompromising one, often walks alone. Not because he wants to, but because clarity has a strange effect. It separates. When you begin to see through things, social games, shallow praise, performative emotions, you begin to feel like a stranger in familiar places. Conversations feel scripted. Ambition feels hollow. Even friendships start to feel like transactions. You try to explain, but the words never quite land. People hear you, but they don't understand you. Not really. And so, over time, you stop trying. You grow silent, not out of arrogance but self-preservation. Because when truth becomes your language, small talk feels like a lie. When your thoughts are shaped by solitude and suffering, the noise of the crowd starts to feel unbearable. This is the cost of inner clarity. But it's not just loss. There's beauty here too, an uncommon kind. You begin to see value where others don't. In silence, in thought, in moments of honesty too raw for comfort. You develop an immunity to the circus of modern life. You stop chasing things that don't matter. You're not easily sold to, shamed, or seduced. You become difficult to control, not because you resist, but because you see through the illusion. And slowly, you discover peace. Not the cheerful kind, not the curated kind, but a deeper, quieter peace, the kind that comes from knowing you are living in alignment with your own mind, even if no one claps for it. In a world that rewards speed, you move slowly. In a culture built on noise, you value stillness. You begin to find others too, not many, but a few. People who see like you do, and when you speak, there's no need to explain everything. There's just recognition, relief, like finally coming home in a world where you've always felt like a guest. So, if you are one of these men, questioning, observing, silent, misread, know this: you are not alone. You are part of a lineage. Socrates, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, men who were mocked in their time, only to become monuments in the minds of generations. You carry a difficult gift, a dangerous one, but also an essential one. Because in a time of deception, seeing clearly is the first act of revolution, and in a world of noise, one honest mind is enough to shake everything.